Yes.
Right, thank you very much, and good day to you all, wherever you are. I expect spread across the world, so we could be in daylight in some places. We're in darkness and pouring rain here. Welcome to the British Interplanetary Society. It's great to see some of our audience has battled through the pouring rain to be here tonight. And we're at our headquarters here in Vauxhall in London. And I'm pleased to say that we have many Asgardians, I don't know how many, joining us from online from all over the world. So welcome. Our camera and Zoom system are up in the capable hands, I think, at the back there with our CEO, Simon Feast. I'm going to thank you, first of all, for joining us. But for those who don't know me, I'm the president of the Society. I'm Alistair Scott, and I'm chair of the events committee. So if any of you got any good ideas for events and for talks, please let me know. Now, the British Interplanetary Society, some of you may not know us terribly well, is, well, I would say it's the oldest society advocacy organization for space. I would say probably it's the longest established, and it's devoted solely to supporting and promoting astronautics and the exploration of space. Formed in 1933, it has outlived all those that came before it. We continue to publish technical papers in our journal, BIS, which began life in January 1934, and our technical committee runs a number of projects and studies ranging from propulsion systems and spaceports to interstellar spacecraft, spaceships, and colonies. Our motto is from imagination to reality. So if you have any bright ideas, please come and see us. Our education and outreach team is always on the lookout for ways of promoting astronautics and space at schools and colleges, and even drawn up syllabus for a space A-level. They are also the coordinator here in the UK for the World Space Week activities. Finally, if you've never visited us in Vauxhall, please do so. The building is a bit of a treasure trove for space history, with a comprehensive library, an amazing collection of 1930s to 50s original artworks and archives that go right back to the start of the space age. So those of you joining us on Zoom tonight, please use the chat box for your networking, and also use it for your questions and hopefully answers. What we'll do is, if you put the word question in front of it, then we'll recognize it as a question, and we can actually ask the question for you from here. We may actually select you to come up on screen if that's possible. So I think moving on from there, I'd like to say that tonight we're extremely pleased that we have with us Lembit Opik, chair of the leader of the chair of the Parliament of Asgardia. So I'm hoping that you'll tell us a little bit more about it. Now, Lembit, I've known for donkey's years. I think we first met when you were first an MP with the Parliamentary Space Committee way back in 99. Yes, that was an interesting year. We were just trying to get Beagle 2 ready to go to Mars. And I think you joined us for the celebrations of launch and the commiserations of not actually doing what we were supposed to do. So it's really great to have you back here again, and we'll look forward to hearing all about Asgardia. So over to you, Lembit.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The screen on here. Bear with me.
Excellent. That won't detect anything.
No, this is all good. So
just scroll down with the arrow.
Yes, we'll just go here and then.
You could have launched something into space by now.
Yeah, that's right. Hang on a minute. What you want to do is just.
I can just use the arrow.
Yeah. Actually, beginning.
Well, that is the beginning.
There we go. Yeah.
Oh, we can just use the arrow.
Yeah, I believe it works. So try that.
Okay. Okay. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to see old friends here again. My association with the British Interplanetary Society really got going when I was a member of Parliament. But my history with space goes back to my birth. My grandfather was Ernst Julius Opik. He was, in his day, a world-renowned astronomer, and he focused on the solar system, and he was heavily involved in the NASA space program to go to the moon. And here's the first great revelation. We did go to the moon, he told me, and he was organizing some of the work to establish what the surface of the moon would be like and whether the astronauts would just simply sink into deep dust or not. So from really the first year I could talk, I was surrounded by a vast library of books, nothing like as big as yours here, but not far off it. And my father, who was a nuclear physicist, could see my interest. And when I was 12, I was given a book by my father and grandfather, which I read and pretty much understood. And it turned out to be a PhD, a postgraduate book about astronomy, called Astronomy Now. I still have it, actually. I was looking at it just a few days ago. An explanation about my name. It's Estonian. I was born in Northern Ireland, but I grew up in an Estonian community there, which is quite an unusual thing. And English is my second language, which is why my grammar is probably better than my Estonian. But the language I love the most is the language of science. And when I was invited to be more active in a space nation that I was already very interested in, I was absolutely honored to say yes. And in this presentation, I hope to inspire you not just to enjoy the history of the world's first fully functioning digital nation, but also to feel inspired by the world's first space nation, a nation which can function off Earth as well as it functions upon it. I also hope to commence what should be a truly symbiotic relationship between the people of Asgardia and its parliament and the people who inhabit the British Interplanetary Society, a society with 91 years of experience, as you've heard, the most long-lasting society of its kind anywhere in the world. In this presentation, I will give you an outline of the history, but also of the mission of Asgardia. And I want at this point to welcome the Asgardians from all over the world who have had 2 meetings already this evening and have joined in large numbers tonight. The Parliament itself represents over 40 terrestrial nations, and we have had over 1 million followers of Asgardia and thousands of residents too. Perhaps if I'm persuasive enough, you'll join Asgardia and be fellow travellers on our reach to the stars, which after all is the essence of why the British Interplanetary Society exists. Let's talk about Asgardia now. It's the first space nation, by which I mean the first dedicated nation that wishes to inhabit space, to start from a clean sheet, to take the best of humanity and our practices and try to leave some of the less popular and less desirable aspects of how we live behind. It was founded by the visionary Dr. Igor Asher-Bailey, a man with great rocket experience, a successful entrepreneur, and a person who I was honored to spend time with in his hometown of Baku in Azerbaijan. We were there last year for a global space convention and had some very useful meetings. Dr. Asher-Bailey understood one day that there was something wrong with how we do politics on Earth, and there's something limiting with nations competing in space races to dominate it. His vision was not to create a competition with terrestrial nations which are all too accustomed to war rather than peace. His vision was to inhabit the universe for all humankind and for all sentience, to go out there not with guns and bombs, but with a collective commitment to do what I think the human race does best, achieve insights and perhaps some enlightenment about the nature and the meaning of the universe by working together to go there. So on the 12th of October, 2016, he founded Asgardia. Many people thought that Asgardia would be a short-lived vanity project. They didn't think it would get anywhere. But here we are, 8 years later, and we're still going strong. Now, Asgardia can summarize its ambition in a simple sentence: to unite people in a transnational, equal and progressive society to build a new home for humanity in space and protect our cradle, planet Earth. Now, the current population of Asgardia comprises more than 1.1 million people from more than 200 earthly nations. Almost every nation on Earth has an Asgardian within it. And our motto, one humanity, one unity, really sums up what Dr. Asher Bailey's vision is for this, in his sense, in his context, altruistic ambition, for he seeks no reward for it himself. He's trying to make a legacy for all of us and all of those who follow us. One humanity, one unity has led to one of the first Asgardian words, Oho, which is O-H-O-U, Ohu. That's what we say when we meet. And it may sound strange to you now, but it's just a natural thing that we say. And I learn already that a culture develops not through some enforced planning mechanism, but through the natural evolution of how people get on. For me, the Asgardian mission is to work together in a way which actually really achieves that unity and that sense of humanity. We have some very specific goals. The first human born in space, a truly digital nation that works in a non-physical way, though we also meet physically, and the safeguarding of Earth, our home planet, as well as peace and space. Let me say something about those three, and I'll come to the first human born in space at last. In terms of digital nation, it's obvious that if you live in a society which is spread across a solar system, you can't meet all the time. You don't go down to a local restaurant or coffee shop or bar to meet your colleagues. You have to do it digitally. It doesn't really need much explanation. But also it means that to achieve our scientific goals and build a society of the future, we have to have a fully functioning digital society that doesn't go offline when there's a power cut. So on Earth, we've created systems that we think are robust enough to operate in space. There are some big challenges. Once you have people living light hours apart, then communication becomes more difficult, let alone light years. But for now, and for the next maybe century or so, if we're within the solar system, that isn't going to be the main issue. Now, in terms of Earth and peace, Asgardia has no army. It never will have an army. It is dedicated to not resolving its conflicts through a show of strength. And what's really important there is that we seek to eliminate militarism from the mindset of those who wish to inhabit space. Let's face it, space is a very hostile environment. It's not an enemy, but it doesn't forgive if you make mistakes. The last thing we need is humans fighting each other, but we're fighting for survival of Earth. We also have an ambition to protect Earth, which is always in the firing line for near-Earth objects, which is how I've met some of you before, but also for other threats which could, we perceive, cause trouble. And so our view is to protect the Earth from things that could come at us from space, because whatever life exists elsewhere, we know it is rare, or at least sentient life is rare. Pretty sure there isn't any other sentient life in our solar system. And it would be, to quote Carl Sagan, an unforgivable act of neglect for us to allow ourselves to be extinguished. So those were the two important pillars that Dr. Asher Bailey has set. But the most important, in a way, is the first human born in space. Why? It's logical. If we can't have human births in space, we can't leave. You can't just come down to see the midwife, then go back up into space. And on a moment's reflection, and I hadn't really appreciated this till Dr. Asher Bailey shared it with me, on a moment's reflection, we have to be able to reproduce our species off Earth. That creates all kinds of challenges, and we can maybe talk about those in questions rather than me going into the details now. But it's also one of those inspirational things I referred to before. The idea of a family being born in space and continuing space and maybe spending their whole lives in space, that's where we need to go if we are really going to reach for the stars. We have a constitution. It was created back in 2017 in June. It's had one update as well. It's available here as well if you want to have a look at it. And what it seeks to do is enshrine the sentiments and the commitment to peace and equality in a way which makes sense to everybody. We don't spend time arguing about religion. Have the beliefs you want, but they will not be enforced by Asgardia, nor will they be discriminated against. Dr. Asgardia approved the results of a referendum in which 72.5% of Asgardians approved that constitution, which puts us quite far ahead of the United Kingdom, which doesn't have one. At the same time, we hope that this could form a basis for whatever is needed as the human race separates into different colonies, if you want, different communities around the solar system and beyond. I'm not going to read all this out, but the Declaration of Unity of Asgardia essentially lays out our unbending commitment to leave the worst mistakes human beings make behind and to take the best of what we are into space. I can summarize it here. We, the people of Asgardia, will do everything for the prosperity of our new space nation created by us, for the safeguarding of our fatherland, planet Earth, and the development of the entire humankind in space. Our motto is one humanity, one unity, and the declaration is a primary document for the creation of the space nation of Asgardia. This presentation will be available to all of you. You'll be able to download it as well, so you can read the words in your own time. A lot of thought's gone into this. I was a member of Parliament in the United Kingdom for 13 years, and I would say there are many things Asgardia does that I wish we did on Earth. The national symbols, I've got an anthem, you'll hear that in a video I'll play at the very end, and the motto, which I've already summarized. We have a coat of arms and a flag. All of that was put together in a collegiate way. The exciting thing about all of it is it kind of makes sense. One of the most moving moments of my life was when we inaugurated Dr. Asgardia as the world's first head of a digital space nation. And they played that in a great palace in Vienna. We've also been to space. Dr. Asgardia realized that we couldn't just make it work by being here on Earth. We have to go beyond the confines of our planet. And in a symbolic act, we declared our own territory with Asgardia 1, which was launched on the 12th of November 2017, containing the data of all of Asgardians at that time. Now, from a legal point of view, this is really kind of interesting, I think. The main legal goal is the creation of an independent state which is recognized by other nations on Earth. And our core ambition in terms of our foreign policy is to get recognition from Earth. There are two countries with which we're debating at the moment. I've been a 36-hour trip to the south of the equator some years ago to make progress there. And it's a nation I won't name now, but I believe that there's a very good chance they'll recognize us. And there's one in Europe as well that I'm working with closer to home. So that will be a massive, massive leap forward for us when we get that recognition. Then space exploration should be equally available for all terrestrial nations. So we want to be a place you can come, regardless of where you are, regardless of your politics, and work with Asgardia to have a presence in space. And the core legal principle is that Asgardia does not interfere in relations between states on Earth and vice versa. Now, that's easy to say, but quite hard to do. Everybody has an opinion when there's a war, but Asgardia does not express one. And sometimes we get pushed to make a statement. We have a very simple answer. We do not involve ourselves in the tribulations and the problems facing nations on Earth, because we have to work with all nations, because we are not claiming any territory on the planet. So far, that's worked well. And that, of the three, was probably the most challenging, maturing process that I, as the chair of the Parliament, have had to deal with. But I think we've got it right. And you won't find Asgardians stumbling in to probably the most difficult aspect of international relations on our planet's surface. The space infrastructure of Asgardia is fairly logical. You've got launchers, spaceports. We want to have an Asgardia national arc in orbit around the Earth. We want to do something similar on the Moon with the Moon arc, and then a star arc. Once again, you can look at this in your own time. But the other part is the protective space platform. I made a name for myself in Parliament from 1999 onwards, when I continued to work with my grandfather about the threat of near-Earth objects. And I once started a speech, perhaps unwisely, with the phrase in the House of Commons, "Mr. Speaker, I've got a problem with asteroids," which made people think that I had some sort of medical condition. And a lot of funny people all send me the same cream for that. I actually got the government of the day to do a report into the threat of near-Earth objects, and they set up the Near-Earth Object Task Group. A lot of people thought that was a big joke. But when the task group reported, it said you're 750 times more likely to die as a result of an asteroid impact than to win the national lottery in any given weekend. And people stopped laughing then. And at that point, we've got 14 recommendations as a result of the work I was doing with Alistair and others to be implemented by the government. To date, sadly, only half of one of them was implemented, though the National Space Centre in Leicester did benefit to an extent with the work that was done. A place I was honoured to have lunch with Buzz Aldrin, the second man on the moon, thanks largely to the work I was doing with colleagues here. This is pre-Asgardia. Now, the head of nation, that's Dr. Asher Bailey, and he presides over the entire structure of Asgardia. When you ask him, is he a president or a king or a prime minister, he says, "I'm whatever you want me to be. I don't mind the definition, but I'm the head of this nation." He has taught me more than most people I've had the honor to work with, because his selflessness in investing in a nation that won't cause him to live in space, but could cause us to be able to be there, is action and progress in physical form. He's very well educated, but more than anything, he has a focus, a clarity of thought, which is quite rare. That's me at the inauguration at the top in Vienna. It's a memory I will never, ever forget. And to the other side of him is the head of the Supreme Council, he's the Supreme Justice, head of the justice system, Yun Zhao. We had thousands of people interested, and 600 million people followed our proceedings. That was almost a tenth of the human race. The state structure is fairly predictable. Parliament, government, court. I am the chair of the Parliament. That's me being elected, actually, to chair of Parliament in June 2018, at the same time, roughly, as the inauguration of Dr. Asher Bailey. Then there's the government. The government consists of 12 ministers and a prime minister, who is currently Lena de Winner. You'll see her in a moment. And then we have the court structure. These three things are separated. I sometimes wonder how successful we really are at separating those areas of authority in terrestrial nations, but we do it well. There can be tensions between these groups, but we work them out. What's really important to tell you is that there are no party political structures in Asgardia. We're united by the common mission of permanent life in space. Factionalism wouldn't help us. I'm not sure how much it helps us on Earth. But because we self-selected ourselves to be involved in this great mission, which has now been a tenth of my life, I realize that we don't need party structures that compete for power, because that's not what this is all about. If you want to get power, stand for Parliament in a terrestrial government environment. If you want to empower, especially for the future, then this is the place to be. These are the heads of the three pillars, if you like. I'm chair of the Parliament, and there are 150 members of Parliament in Asgardia, and we meet 4 times a year, usually. Pre-COVID, one of those was physical, and we're trying to get back to that now. I also have weekly sessions, and indeed, thanks to the kindness of the British Interplanetary Society, I had my meeting with the chairs of the 12 committees up in the library, followed by a meeting and a question and answer session, which I have every week with my 130 MPs at the moment, which is on a voluntary basis. Next weekend, we've got our digital sitting, 8th, 9th and 10th of March, which is the formal sitting of Parliament. We discuss legislation, we make other decisions, we get a government report, and we'll actually be electing the chair of the Finance Committee. So all the things that you need in a civic structure, but we do it all digitally. It's actually so effective, I forget the people I've physically met and the people I haven't. And that's quite an achievement. I don't know how often you have to do digital meetings. I perhaps slightly boldly suggest that Asgardia is the most professional online multi-person site that I ever attend. Dr. Lena de Winner is Prime Minister. She holds an MSc in engineering, MBA and PhD in psychology. And she heads up the 12 ministers. And then we've got, she's also been steeped in, for familial reasons, steeped in the world of space for many, many, many years. She's also hosted a TV documentary program in Belgium. And I think it's worth mentioning, she's been there from the start, longer than me, formerly serving actually as Minister of Information and Communications and then Head of Administration to the Head of the Nation. So she's actually occupied 3 really senior roles, whereas I've occupied just 1. And then we've got Professor Yun Zhao, who's a Supreme Justice. He's a Professor of Law at the University of Hong Kong, and he works with us, but independently, and he resolves any issues with his Supreme Justices, the people who work with him, to make sure that the legal system works. And so far, at least, we've managed to maintain a really proper and respectful demarcation between the 3 areas. We also got administration. The head of administration has his own body, really, connecting the highest office and the rest of Asgardia's offices, really. 2 things about him. Dimitri Dorin Prinario, as acting head of administration, is Romanian. And the second thing is he's been to space. So he actually has seen the Earth from above. And I envy him for that. Something I'd like to do at least once in my life, though I doubt whether they'll let me stay because I might not be of working age by that point. We'll see. So he heads up the administration as well. We've got our own currency, the solar, and it's a national currency. It's totally stable. It's fixed at 1-to-1 with the euro. So it's got real efficacy. You can buy things with solars, and the Parliament gets paid in solars as well. And we have our own economy. It's also a decentralized blockchain type system. And so far, despite some attempts at hacking in, no one's been able to fraud the system or break into it. And it's successful. Every Asgardian has access to the national currency anywhere on Earth or in space. If you want to become an Asgardian, you'll be able to use this currency, and our economy is now beginning to go as well. We've got 12 languages. This was once again done in a democratic way. The 12 official languages of Asgardia are English, Turkish, Spanish, Chinese, Russian, Italian, Hindi, French, German, Arabic, Farsi, and Indonesian. English is by far the most popular, about 42%, followed by Turkish. In Turkey, we have this huge following, and I'm working with Father Inan, who's a fantastic as a member of the Asgardian Parliament there, hopefully to set up the first physical embassy for Asgardia. Partly because with Istanbul having roughly half the population of the United Kingdom, there's a rich seam of people who could be interested in joining us. Those countries, those languages aren't exclusive. Whatever your language, whatever your country, you're welcome. But we made a judgment that 12 would be about right. Also, you might ask, what kind of people join Asgardia? We've got lots of scientists, inventors, IT specialists, engineers, entrepreneurs, lawyers. But we also got artists, writers, poets, people who have made a living thinking as philosophers, perhaps students as well, cosmopolitans, people who identify themselves as residents of the universe rather than just of a country here. And anyone is welcome, because as with any society, you need all the skills, not just a few. The residents of Asgardia have status which gives them real opportunities. You have to be a resident of Asgardia to be a member of the Asgardian Parliament. But anyone who's over 18 who registers, and there are certain data protection acts we will just have to follow, and pays an annual residency fee of just 100 euros or 100 solars, the same thing, can become a resident of Asgardia. That's the annual residency fee. It's a kind of tax to be an Asgardian. But once you're in, you're in. You can get the magazines, and feel free to take a copy here today. You get a residency ID card as well, delivered to you for nothing. And you've got the right to participate in elections as well. You could be the next chair of parliament if you become a resident and you wait long enough for me to retire. We also hold congresses and we meet up as we did in Baku and so forth. And another event which is coming up, I'll tell you about a little bit later on, relates to the solar eclipse in America in April. We've also got our own calendar. I won't go into the details now, but we realized that the terrestrial calendar is a little bit random. It's evolved in a typically human way. Our calendar, instead of having 12 months, varying numbers of days, we've got 13 equal 28-day-long months. And that requires a little bit of adjustment at times, but it's a completely logical calendar. And we realized that the Earth year isn't particularly relevant if you're living on Mars or Pluto. So this one, okay, it reflects the terrestrial calendar, but that's because human beings, at least for now, think in terrestrial years. I won't explain all of this now, but it's always the same date on a Sunday, a Wednesday and a Friday. The other important thing to realize is we don't have religious holidays, because once you start doing that, you discover there's a religious holiday on almost every day of the year, if you look at the whole of the Earth. And we don't try to impose a particular secular tradition on our members. You can be, or our residents, you can be whatever you want to be, and as long as you don't enforce it on other people, then that's fine. Science is really, really significant to us, of course, because with science comes enlightenment. And we have to get the science right. There must be cheaper ways to build space stations than the way we do now. Professor Floris Wits is the Asgardian Minister of Science. He's actually a professor at the University of Antwerp in Belgium, but he's also head of Lab for Equilibrium Investigations in Aerospace, LEIA, and he does a huge amount of work in the European Space Agency. And what he's trying to do is pave the road to living in space, which is a scientific challenge, a subset of which is biology, of course. And we had a fantastic science congress in Germany some years ago, and we want to get that first child born in space. That's a huge, huge challenge, but it needs us to get this right, the science right, because it would be utterly irresponsible to perform an experiment on an unborn child if we think there's any risk of failure. Now, to achieve this goal, we're already learning and experimenting with how it would be to live in space. The Sirius 21 experiment was a long period isolation experiment, 240 days, in fact, in a containment module at the test station, in Moscow. And it had an international team of contributors. There was no politics in it. It was pure science. And we learned a lot from it. This lady here, Victoria Kirichenko, was one of the research subjects in the experiment. And we learned about the psychology of it, we learned about the biology of it, and we learned about the self-sustainability of it, because nothing could go in. They had to be self-sustaining. The only thing that was not as it would be in space was the presence of 1g of gravity. And I've asked them about this. They said that really wasn't the main objective here, that you really have to find other ways to test the gravitational impact on our bodies. And we've learned quite a lot from the International Space Station. But it was about every other aspect of what it would take to live for 2/3 of a year away from Earth. And you can get to all the main places we're looking at traveling as humans at the moment in that time scale, and even potentially come back. Then there's another group, Asgardia and Spaceborne. Now, there's a Dutch-based research firm called Spaceborne, and it's trying to create a groundbreaking mission in terms of fertilizing rodents, embryos, and artificial gravity, and then a pregnancy and birth there. So they're doing it in a step-by-step way. The main person there, led by, well, he's Dr. Egbert Edelbrook, is absolutely fascinating. He walks the talk. He lives the subject. His own life experience, which I haven't got time to go into now, says everything you need to know about somebody who understands the question of fertilization and responsible development of the progress towards a human birth. He would never tolerate the idea of a child being born in space on the basis of a gamble. And that means it takes a bit longer. You could do it now, but we're not doing it until we're ready. It will be a great day indeed, because it liberates the human race to truly travel. It's inconceivable that we could go to the nearest star without generations on the spaceship. And so this central realization makes Asgardia work with Spaceborne in order to try to achieve that monumental first child born in space. I don't know quite when or how that will happen, but that's the great thing about true science. You're asking questions, the right questions, even if you don't know what the answers are. Let's put all that together. This is a flavor of Asgardia. It's scientific, it's cultural, it's developing its own language organically, it's uniting, it's resistant to being dragged into terrestrial conflict, but it's embracing of every nation on Earth. It doesn't talk about telling you what to think or who to believe. It discusses the common challenge of making humanity succeed in space. A few questions that I get asked quite often, and we can return to these in the question and answer session shortly. Is it ideological? Yes. This is an idealistic vision for space. What's the point of setting our limitations? Who would consider it wise for us to assume we can't do better in a united space nation than we have done on a disunited planet? It's the idealism that got me involved in the first place. After I first met Dr. Asher Bailey, I thought, this is the kind of world I want to live in. This is the kind of nation I want to live in. And after having spent 13 years in Parliament in the United Kingdom, I can tell you the positivity I feel here, there's no comparison to the shouting and the baying and the backstabbing, even within the political party system itself, that I lived through. It has its place, and perhaps there is no better way given the history of terrestrial politics, but we started from a clean sheet. So yes, it's ideological. Secondly, is it realistic? Of course it is. Who would have imagined in 1903, when the Wright brothers made their short 65-meter hop in the Wright Flyer, that one day there'd be a double-decker plane that could theoretically take 850 people 15,000 kilometers. And yet that was a direct descendant through many iterations from what the Wright brothers achieved. And others were very close to achieving it too. So it is realistic, because the alternative is to do the one thing that the late Professor Stephen Hawking, who I was honored to know, warned us about. He said, if we don't leave the Earth, we will die. Sooner or later, we will be exterminated, perhaps even by ourselves. So it's realistic, but it's also an imperative that we achieve this. And the third question is, why is Asgardia the right way to do it? Well, that's a matter for you to judge. But I have never seen as mature and fully developed a digital democracy as Asgardia. I have choices, diminishing as you get older, of course, but choices in how to spend my time. Now, I wouldn't be doing this just because it's an interesting thing to talk about with fellow space enthusiasts such as yourselves and those watching all over the world. I do this because it has to be achieved, and Asgardia has the best bet of achieving it that I have ever seen. I would say also that there have been other examples of people trying to set up space nations, but never with the clarity of purpose that hopefully you can see from this. Never with somebody with the self-assured belief in his vision as Dr. Asher Bailey, and never with, as in my view, united a group of people who didn't know each other before 2018, really, but who now consider themselves to be a family of humans with a vested and collective interest in achieving something in space. So, yeah, I think that it has to be Asgardia because no one else has got as far as we have. But not really in competition with anyone else because there isn't anyone else that I can see. There are some groups that I find interesting and I would invite them to work with us. But to date, at least, we are in no conflict with anybody else. And if we find some other people who are as good, we'll say, well, let's work together then. Because at the end of the day, in 100 years' time, they may not remember my name, but my children and grandchildren may appreciate the start that we made in the 21st century. I'm going to ask Simon if he can play a video for me. If you can start that, I don't want to risk getting it wrong. I'm going to show you just a 4-minute video which summarizes something of what I've said. And as you watch it, you'll also hear the Asgardian anthem. Perhaps this video summarizes the feeling, the spirit of Asgardia better than what I have said. No pressure, Simon.
No, it's all good. So it's the second video, right?
Yeah, it's a 4-minute video. Don't worry about the other one.
Okay, I think that's this one. So
okay, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, and bear with me. Need to just pop it on the screen so everybody can see.
This is a promotional video. There are various versions of it. There's a 15-minute version, there's a 1-minute version, but this 4-minute version looks to me like the best bet to give you a sense of what we're achieving. This was put together by a TV studios called The Farm, actually, up in, or Ravner Park Studios up in Greenford, about 25 minutes north of Heathrow Airport.
Space. This is an opportunity as a resident of Earth to invest in humanity's reach for the star. Asgardia on the 12th of October 2016 in Paris, France. The dream of Asgardia's founder and first head of nations, Dr. Igor Ashe. His call to action was answered by over 1 million people, the formation of the first fully functional digital democracy in human history. Asgardia is a growing nation, welcoming people with an ambition for humanity from across the world on an epic journey to the stars. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we have ignition. Asgardia has launched its first satellite containing data listing all Asgardians at that time. And with this launch, the ambition of Asgardia became a statement of orbital fact. Asgardia's civic society consists of 3 key elements: the parliament, the government, and the judiciary. We aim to set up a democratic, transparent, efficient, and effective justice system. Asgardia has increasingly inspired those involved to share a magnificent journey of collective discovery and be a part of the truly massive agenda of reaching out into space. Asgardia is also committed to achieving the first safe childbirth in space, a vital part of permanent human space habitation.
The people I have met on this path are incredible. They come from more than 200 countries of the world. They all are enthusiastic about space. No matter where they're from, they believe that
humanity's legacy is to reach out to the stars, to explore how we've so often done before here on Earth, and join Asgardia because we do too. Asgardia invites you to become a resident by sharing in the exciting adventure that awaits beyond our home planet. This is our legacy and your opportunity to help humanity create a new and better society that celebrates one humanity and one unity for all humankind.
We'll get back to it. As you can see, we take our production value seriously too, but that summarizes more or less what I've been saying to you in the last 45 minutes or so. So to conclude, what I want to say to you is 2 observations and 1 question. The 2 observations are this. What Asgardia is doing as a nation is what the British Interplanetary Society was set up to do as a body in 1933. It's been a long wait, my friends, but we're here. And I'm sure we can make common cause because we are now beginning to put the practical elements of a society in space into place. The second observation is this. Despite the skepticism of many of the critics of Asgardia, perhaps because they couldn't see how it might work, we have succeeded in getting this far. And over 1 million individuals have already found their way to us. So much so that on the 8th of April, I'll be in Texas for the total eclipse, a 4.5-minute eclipse, incidentally, to meet with Asgardians who I haven't physically met before, but who are my friends and individuals. The 2 particularly leading the work there, they're known as TJ and Sarah Clark, and they're putting together a celebration of Asgardia and a rallying call for those who have made the effort to go to Texas to enjoy this fantastic solar event, and therefore have an interest in looking up rather than simply looking down. So Asgardia itself has proved its longevity, nothing like the longevity of the British Interplanetary Society, but I believe that we have earned the credibility to reach out to you and to create our first formal relationship with a national interplanetary society in the history of Asgardia and Earth. And the question is this: what are you willing to do in order to make this happen? I hope that you'll all join Asgardia, and I hope that all Asgardians join the British Interplanetary Society, regardless of where they live, but certainly if they're in the United Kingdom. Is this interesting? Great. But if this is motivating, then join and be part of a nation which actually intends to help the human race be the best it can be for planet Earth and in the universe. I'll finish with a thought which is quite personal. My journey started when I was born into an astronomical community in which my grandfather was a big player in his day. I fell in love with Apollo because as a child, I watched these pioneers, these voyagers going to another celestial body and coming back. One of my greatest honors in life was to meet Neil Armstrong and shake his hand, because from the age of 7, it was my ambition to do so. But now I'm doing something else practical. And I hope not only that you will all join Asgardia, whether you're watching around the world or here in the British Interplanetary Society premises in London, England. I hope, in addition to that, at a personal level, that my grandfather, wherever he is, will be looking down with my nuclear physicist father and feeling that I'm carrying on a tradition that might make them proud. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. I think we've learned a lot today, and I think we'd certainly like to ask a few questions. If I may start off, I think your organization seems to be very similar to ours, and the membership's about the same, and you have to live off income from your members. I think that's something that we appreciate very much. And I think you've obviously been able to do quite a lot with the income that you've got, and I hope that it will continue. That you obviously need more members.
Yes, we do. We would love to get more residents, we call them residents, and soon to be citizens. And it's €100 a year. That's all it costs you to be a resident of the world's first space nation. I have dual citizenship as it is on Earth, but I really have 3 because Earth's rather smaller than the rest of the universe. So I like to think that I've got 2 for the Earth and 1 for the rest of the universe. And you can join, and you're all welcome. Everyone's welcome. Then you can get involved. You can be part of this. You can stand for Parliament in Asgardia. You can become a mayor on a terrestrial town and be involved. You can just be active. You can come to our events. Yes, like the British Astronomical Society, we have common cause in terms of attracting people, humans, as well as selling a message.
Sounds good. Now, are there any questions in here? Yes, I think we've got one here.
Thank you for a fascinating talk, Lembit. Just a question on the name and the origin of the name. Could you talk about how that came about?
I certainly can. Simon, the screen, I'm not getting the last screen. It's just on the previous one. Yeah. I'm not going to move because it's easier if I stay here, isn't it?
That's okay.
No, I'll just stay here. Yeah, okay. I just wanted to put that on. It's better background.
Okay.
Asgardia, the city of Asgard is a mythical city of the gods of Earth. And you see Asgardia turning up in various fantasy role-play games and so forth. Thanks, that was great. You see Asgardia turning up in various role-play games and so forth. Dr. Asher Bailey had the idea that, in a sense, our destiny is to reach for the stars and therefore take our sentience out to the universe. And he saw that as quite a mythically inspiring idea. So maybe when we get up there, we'll meet these gods, or perhaps we will be them in the sense that we will be shepherds of a universe which is there for us, but it's only wavelengths until they're observed. And when we observe them, then they become colors, which are only frequencies until they're heard, and then they become sound or even music. And Dr. Asher Bailey has got this creative imagination about this, the idea that we breathe life to where we go. And when human beings do it well, we actually add to the quality of the universe. To me, it would be such a pity to live an isolated existence here on Earth, never go anywhere, wait for the sun to expand as it will do in a very long distance in the future, a few billion years, but after that just be extinguished when we could have done so much more. And so that's why we're called Asgardia, intentionally, in Dr. Asher Bailey's view, to evoke a colourful concept of more than we have been before.
Thank you. Right, well, I've got one question here which I think we should ask. And Andrew Thomas has asked, who is your ethics advisor and how are ethical questions addressed?
There's something called the Supreme Space Council. Now, when you're a 15-year-old boy, you would give anything to be on something called the Supreme Space Council. Well, I'm on it, and it feels as good as I thought it would be 40 years ago. And the Supreme Space Council discusses questions of ethics. Now, before that, the Parliament discusses legislation. So we have 5 items of legislation coming up in 9 days' time, that we will discuss. And the laws about things like digital security and trade and commerce and things like that. But when it comes to ethics, we've got the Constitution, which I mentioned before, which outlines the values which you'll be able to read if you download the presentation, which is freely available for anyone here. But the Constitution is where we get our core values defined. And then the Supreme Space Council will apply the principles to specific issues. On a few occasions, as with any human system, we've had something to deal with, either an individual or a group of people who are asking challenging philosophical questions. So the answer is that's where it would occur. And these are very frank conversations. Head of nation chairs that, Prime Minister's there, I as Chair of Parliament, and their Supreme Space Council. The Supreme Justice is there also. And I have to tell you that my philosophical education at the University of Bristol in England has come in handy, because these are heavyweight issues. What we try to do, though, is not allow any prejudices of our own to get in the way. The question that Dr. Asher Bailey insists we answer is, what is the right thing to do? And then we vote as well. There's one other part to this. I've now learned, more than I did when I was a British Member of Parliament, that a culture evolves its values over time. So what we decide in the terrestrial manifestation or incarnation of Asgardia will be different to what happens when people live on Mars or on some other, Enceladus maybe, because things we haven't even predicted will occur, and there'll be moral challenges with that. Certainly having births in space leads to a whole lot of moral challenges. What happens if your body evolves in a way that you can never come to Earth because it's adapted to the space environment? So there will be questions that we don't even know to ask yet, because we haven't been faced with the physical reality of those challenges. But the structure will remain the same. One last thing I'll say, this whole process is made more straightforward by the absence of factions of political parties, because there isn't one group trying to get control of another. We do have ambitious politicians, people who want to get on. They want to be chairs of committees. They want to get re-elected. They want to be ministers. That's a healthy kind of competition. But you don't get groupings that try to run some other part of our system down for their benefit. As I said at the beginning, that just can't work in space, certainly not for now. And so that's how we operate. And when we are challenged with something which doesn't work well, we change it. Just one example. There was an age limit, a lower age limit to being a member of Parliament. And lots of MPs said we shouldn't have that age limit. So you couldn't be, however keen you were, you couldn't be a member of Parliament if you were 18 or 30 in Asgardia. That's gone now, because we realised it wasn't the right thing to do. So it evolves, and the Constitution was modified a little bit because of this ongoing dialogue within the organisation.
Sounds good, thank you. Right, any questions here? Because we'll ask Griff to ask a question then. Here we are.
I know that you have a judiciary. How does it enforce the judgments?
The judiciary, the question is all about, it's a question that we keep asking, we often get asked, about how do we actually ensure the judgments of the judiciary are enforced. Most of them are quite straightforward. So if, for example, somebody says, I've been wrongly treated by the chairman of this committee, and I think that it was discrimination, then normally we resolve it without having to go to the judiciary. But if there was some accusation of a violation of the laws that we passed, then at the first level, we have not the Supreme Justice, but lower level judges who will make the judgment. We haven't had a jury situation as yet, so that hasn't developed yet. But if the person's unhappy, ultimately we'll go to the Supreme Justice, who you saw speaking before. So most of it's quite straightforward. If there's a question of, let's say, precedent to be set, that there seems to be an inbuilt injustice in how Asgardia is working, or a conflict between two laws, once again, that would eventually sit on the door of the Supreme Justice. And in extremis, it would go to the Supreme Space Council, of which the Supreme Justice is a part. We haven't had those problems yet. Some people have challenged some decisions made, but they were resolved at the Supreme Space Council level. It will be interesting to see what happens if we have a genuine conflict between maybe two individuals or two interest groups in the organization. Maybe it would be an economic problem or a breach of copyright. Those haven't happened yet. So far, we've been a very united nation. I would guess at that point, protocols will be established in an expedient way, and those will become the precedent. That's how Asgardia has developed so far. They will happen, it just hasn't happened yet.
As I said to you earlier, present international space law is frankly archaic, written in an era where only two governments put anything into space. The present situation is that on any space vehicle, the law of a launching nation applies. Have you considered the possibility of conflict between Asgardian law and, say, British or American or Russian law?
Yes, you're right. One of the issues we've got is the nation that launches a spacecraft is also able or has to exercise their national laws on that spacecraft or in relation to that spacecraft. That's a problem because Asgardia has its own laws. And so we're beholden within that in the American, or it could be European or Chinese or Russian. Actually, more than two countries have launched things into space, but by their regulations. You also said before we started today something which is very true. Space law is a complete mess. And we were going to have a space law convention in Canada, but it was thwarted by the COVID, what shall I call it, pandemic. I'll call it pandemic. That in itself leads to all kinds of different controversies. So we recognized the problem. We were going to try to tackle it, but then we were thwarted. We'll come back to that. My personal view, we didn't quite ask it, my personal view is that we need to find a situation whereby we have a more common sense approach to this idea, because otherwise, if Elon Musk is the first to Mars, presumably Mars will be governed by American laws. But what happens if 10,000 Americans live there and 5,000 Russians and 3,000 or 30,000 Chinese? It's going to cause a problem at some point. And another point, somebody asked me, I don't think it was, you actually said it yourself, who's going to enforce it? If Washington or Westminster or Moscow or Beijing says, stop doing that. Well, if you're sitting in Mars 150 million kilometers away, you're probably not going to be too concerned. So it needs to change. What Asgardia would like to do is figure out the transition so that you have self-determination in space. And a lot of what we've built here, and another Dr. Asher Bailey's achievements, is creating something which can then be adapted to the local situation. I don't think that if I was here standing in front of you in 200 years' time and we had 5 Asgardian settlements or 10 or 20 around the solar system, that I would be the supreme power to tell them what to do. You'd have to have a federal system. And at that point, then you have to get to the common dynamic here, the common ambition, which is to inhabit space, not to control everybody who lives there.
That might actually be the problem. Some governments might not like this. I understand at the moment no one can claim a portion of extraterrestrial body as their own. What about if somebody just decides to lock the airlocks on a base and not let somebody else in?
Well, we get to the first question you asked. That would be a violation. I'm sure that would be a violation of some protocols. It depends exactly how it's done. But this is a difficult issue, and this is an area which we haven't yet resolved. So you're right to ask the question because we're asking it. And had we not been locked away from our conference, we probably would have made more progress. But we do talk about the same issue without necessarily having a solution at the stage. But we have to resolve it. We will. And I know for sure it cannot be that terrestrial nations pretend they can enforce their terrestrial laws upon distant communities when there's no real enforcement methodology. There has to be a more mature way of doing it than that.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Griff. We've got a lot of questions coming in now, so we've got to get a move on. The first one from Talil Al-Alim, and he says, Lembit, thank you for your presentation. How can someone get involved in Asgardia in a way that is more hands-on than a member?
Well, first of all, go to asgardia.space and you'll find us. There's only one asgardia.space, and you'll find out how you can become a resident. My advice would be, first thing to do, become a resident. Then you get all the rights. Secondly, depending where you are in the world, you might find that there are physical Asgardians nearby that you could meet up with. And I travel. I love to meet Asgardians around the world, and from now on, I'm traveling a little bit more. Like I said, I'm going to America to spend a week working with Asgardians there. But then there's a digital side to it as well. And we have a structure which I will illustrate. You can get all of this online as well. A structure, a pyramid. This might be a little bit small for the camera, but I'll hold it up just in case this does some good. The structure, it's a pyramid. And let me just find it. There we are. You won't be able to see this probably, but let me illustrate it anyway. There's a structure where we've got Asgardians there, and the target is to have 150 million Asgardians. Then residents, 15 million, citizens, 1.5 million, city representatives, 150,000, country representatives, 150, continental representatives, 15, and then the parliament itself, 150. So my advice to you would be become a resident and then volunteer to become, for example, a city representative. We need to populate the whole of civic society in Asgardia. Here's another point. This may surprise you. I'm here to help. And as much as I'm able to, if you contact me, then I'm very happy to contribute. The first place to go is asgardia.space. Now, I may not eventually do the actual groundwork with you, but I can make sure you're getting to the right people. There are others obviously involved when you contact me that we can farm out the information. It would be a happy problem to get 1 million inquiries after today. But if you start in the first instance by becoming a resident, and then you can become a city representative, we have thousands of spaces in the space of Asgardia, and it's very, very fulfilling. We're actually looking for mayors at the moment, for example, for cities and towns. And then you can say, I'm a resident of Asgardia. As soon as you say it, people ask you, what's that about? They might even joke about it. But if you see the clarity of purpose and you'll develop your understanding quickly, then you could be one of the ambassadors here on Earth for the next natural phase for the development of the human race in space. And then it gets interesting. And a lot of people will go, never heard of that before.
Fascinating. We should have had Lord Rees in on this conversation as well. Right.
The problem with Lord Rees is he thinks we can do a lot of this with robots. And it's an ongoing argument I have with him, because I say we have to send humans because it's a qualitatively different experience.
When he was standing in that position, well, we had this tape on the 18th of January, he actually did say we need humanoids. In other words, we actually need a mix of both robotics and a human brain to actually make it work. But anyway, that was a surprise for me.
That's a development, because until now I've heard Lord Rees, who's a good friend, massive respect for him. He was very helpful when I was running my Near Earth Object campaign in Parliament. But where I differ with him slightly is the importance of having humans in space, because there's no substitute for that footprint left by Neil Armstrong on the moon, or the first footprint left by a human on Mars.
Yes, well, that's virtually what he said was here. But to actually survive on another planet, we may have to have some sort of evolve. Well, he didn't say evolve because it would take too long, but he said we'd have to have a slightly different species.
It's called transhumanism.
Something
like that. And I'm actually working with somebody, very interesting person called Inara Tabir about this, fascinating individual, and she's introducing me to people in that sector, and I want to hear more about it, what they have in mind.
Right. Well, I think I better move on. There's a lot of questions coming up here. Mike S. says, does Asgardia have any form of police force to back up the justice system?
No, we don't. Not at this stage, Mike, because we haven't really got territory to police, but we do have a legal system, and we have capacity, for example, and this isn't set in stone, but the capacity to take away the one thing that we bestow, which is citizenship. And if somebody just doesn't seem to be following the fundamental values of Asgardia, then we can actually simply terminate their involvement. And in a digital sense, we can exclude them. Now, I don't really want to do that to people because, for one thing, nobody is perfect. Anyone who reads the British newspapers knows I'm not the first person to preach about saintly living. But at the same time, I don't go around committing vindictive crimes or trying to make other people's lives worse. So we have a gentleness of touch when it comes to human frailty and human weakness. But in the last resort, if somebody willfully seeks to be undermining the mission of Asgardia, locking people out of those space stations, we'll say, well, you're not really buying into our mission objective. Nothing personal, sir or madam, but you don't really fit because you're actually working against the core mission of Asgardia, which is permanent human space habitation. So we don't have a physical police force, but we have mechanisms which are essentially digital to control people. So far, we've had no physical assault on anybody. I don't want to tempt fate at any of our events in terms of one Asgardian attacking another. But if that happened in, for example, a terrestrial conference, then the local laws would apply. And we wouldn't need to have our Asgardian police officer. We just call the local ones.
Fascinating. During COVID, we had hackers who came in on some of our lectures, which I think we would have done with a police force to actually get rid of them.
But you can have a digital police force.
Well,
if you could exclude them.
We did exclude them, so that helped. Right, I've got another one here, actually from Ole Henrik Field, who says, greetings from Norway. We can already see the need for internet services and GPS services throughout our solar system, especially around the moon and Mars. Is Asgardia involved in work on an infrastructure project such as this?
Yes, we are. I don't know if I'm able to move the dial here. Oh, yes, I can. I'm going to try. I'm going to see. I may have to evoke Simon's assistance again, but there's one slide here.
He's not here. Is Simon out?
Okay, well, we'll see if we can. There's a slide. I'll show it whenever Simon comes back. But
Okay.
yes, we are. We agree. What was the gentleman's name, sir?
This was Ole Henrik Field.
Ole, basically, yes. We have to communicate. Communication is everything if you're a digital society. And we meet regularly. I probably spend 300 or 400 hours. Simon, could you possibly get me to another slide? I'm not able to change it, sorry. I spend hundreds of hours a year online. And so, just need to get that one. Okay. And digital, right.
Hang on. Very near.
I'm not sure why it's sticking, but it is.
Right.
We spend hundreds of hours online every year. That's my main communication with the Asgardian members of the Parliament and beyond. And you actually mentioned two things which are quite different. It's the moon and there's Mars. The moon, you've got a 2-second delay. So if you're on the Earth, you're talking to the moon, you can manage that. Sometimes if a social network isn't working well, you get that kind of delay. And we know how to manage that. We've seen astronauts do that. Then the question yes, keep going. Well done. Okay. The question about Mars is a bit, thank you. The question about Mars is a bit more challenging because we have an 8-minute or up to 15-minute delay there. If you watch the film, The Martian, which I think is a tremendous film, it's quite close to the scientific reality. Of course, there's license there as well. I don't want to spoil the film for you, but the launch towards the end of the film seems a little bit implausible. But basically, in that film, they've got a problem. They can't control anything that's happening on Mars because it's too far away. So we've got an idea of having a national arc in Earth orbit where there isn't a communications delay. Not really. Moon as well. Then you go further and then it gets more difficult. It's an issue which can be solved scientifically up to a point. The question is, what do you do about the speed of light? Because if you're on Europa, for example, or somewhere in the neighborhood of Jupiter, leaving aside all the cosmic issues and the magnetic challenges and everything else, you've got hours between transmissions, hours to wait for transmission to go forwards and backwards. I wonder if there's a predictive methodology there or there's some system that can be employed. But if I'm running a parliament with somebody right out of Pluto, well, it's going to take them 16 hours to respond to something that I say on Earth. And that, I think, is the limiting factor here. And I wonder, I welcome your views about how we manage that. It could simply be that makes societies of humans in space quite isolated where there's a prearranged relationship between, let's say, the home planet or some hub and them. Oftentimes in science fiction, they have warps of time and so on. Maybe they're possible, but we haven't got that technology right now, and we don't know if it's possible. Action at a distance, people suggest, where there's some interesting things being proved at the quantum level, that might solve the problem. But at the moment, and for the foreseeable future, the biggest question is, what do we do when we have long delays in that communication process? In terms of the technology, that's developing fast. I don't think that's going to be a problem, because already you could theoretically have something like a mobile phone that's produced to operate in space. After all, the International Space Station has no trouble communicating with HQ on the Earth now. So yes, the answer to you is yes, we are working on that. The question I'm putting back to you is, what do we do about light speed?
Overcome it. Right, I think the next question is from Alan Marlowe, who says, you have great vision for humanity. For humanity's place in the cosmos, which I applaud, but it's an extremely expensive vision. How do you anticipate raising the funds to fund this vision?
By having 150 million Asgardians, 15 million residents, and by having a functioning economy that turns over the billions we need. Dr. Astrobailey is not an authoritarian, and he doesn't want to have a command economy. He wants this to work by us generating our own wealth like a terrestrial nation should. As such, the two dynamics here are getting the Asgardian economy working, which is what we're aiming to do. Now, we already have some companies, the first one being something called Starshot, set up by the former vice chair of the parliament, Ben Dell, who's in South Africa, and some other companies developing as well. So we expect to make the revenue ourselves. No one in Asgardia expects a handout. We expect a hand up, but we help each other get there. The second part of this is by economies of scale. One thing that Elon Musk has done, which is really interesting, is reduce the cost of space launch. And I've mentioned the Wright brothers before and the development of aviation. Well, the great breakthrough was in the 1960s when Boeing came up with the wide-bodied airliner, the Boeing 747, and it changed the dynamics, the economic dynamics of flying. It made aviation possible for the masses instead of just the few. Even to this day, only 11% of the human race maximum has flown, but it wouldn't be anything like that even if that breakthrough hadn't happened. So I do put store on technology. The other thing is, if we actually get a permanent settlement on the moon, it makes further travel much cheaper. That's why everyone's interested in the water on the moon, because with water, you've got power and you've got something to breathe. So I would say it may look expensive, but we've done it before. And indeed, the first time somebody made a watch, which was really for reasons of marine travel, it was fabulously expensive, but now you can wear a very accurate device on your hand for peanuts. Same goes for mobile phones. So the technology will make it cheaper, but we have to have that functioning economy in Asgardia to make sure that we're self-funding. I don't think Dr. Astrobailey intends us to have a big national deficit.
Right, we've got another question here from Jerry Stone, who you may know. He says, have you any idea what size population might be needed before you have the first person born in space?
Great question, Jerry, and the answer is no. And the reason is because it's actually, the question you're asking isn't the question we're trying to answer at the moment. What we're trying to answer is, what are the scientific and biological conditions that create a safe conception for birth in space? Now, you only need one person to do that, to give birth. The question which seems to be implicit in what you're asking is, what size of population would be sustainable? Now, I've seen a figure which suggested, and apologies if this isn't really the question that you're asking, I'm not trying to answer a question I don't think you're asking, but I find it interesting. It's been suggested that you only need about something like just over 100 people in a colony in space to make a long-distance trip with enough genetic diversity for things to stay okay. It sounds like a bit on the low side to me. So if you're asking what size of community is sustainable, I'm not an expert on this, but I reckon it's in the number of hundreds, but probably not thousands. But for that first birth, that's a scientific and biological challenge, which requires one volunteer and some very, very substantial preparation before we take that step. Because as I said before, I would not countenance, however tempting it may be to be first, I wouldn't countenance taking risks with an unborn child who has not made the decision to be that guinea pig.
Right. Well, I think we've got several other questions coming along here. I was interested in your reply to Al Marlowe's, I think, and it sounds as if tax is going to be the way.
Yeah.
I suppose membership is in effect some form of tax is going to fund all the activities. So it's interesting.
But 2 parts to that. Yes, the €100 per annum residency fee is a kind of tax. It's like you pay for a passport in the UK, for example, but it's a residence. We call it residency fee. And when we get to citizenship, which we're developing carefully, there are rather subtle reasons why setting up the citizenship agenda and positioning is quite challenging, but we're getting there. But with the residency fee, that is a tax that goes into the coffers, into the central bank, if you like. But the other part of this is, if we're successful and we've got enough people and we've got enough entrepreneurs, they might see the economic opportunity of building what we need to live in space within Asgardia, within the Asgardian economy, which I imagine will be heavily focused on the kind of technological challenges that we need to overcome in order to live in space. So it could be that we don't have to pay for everything from the state. I know that Dr. Asher Bailey wants it to be a free market, wants to be a celebration of visionary entrepreneurs. And he would celebrate the fact that we have millionaires in Asgardia who've got rich by helping us achieve our goals. So it's not just taxpayers' money. And once again, we've seen Elon Musk, who nearly did actually go bankrupt in the pursuit of his space ambitions, prove that you can make a lot of money, especially if you start with a lot of money in space. So it's not just the government paying for everything. I think that we should also be quite clear that the successful Asgardian economy will help us achieve these goals while making a profit for the entrepreneurs who achieve that.
Right, we're going to take questions from the floor again. Here we go.
Given that you're operating a parliamentary democracy, what's the process by which Parliament holds government to account? Second question is, are there any British MPs who are Asgardians?
On the first point, the way Parliament holds government to account is, first of all, by appointing the ministers. They are presented to us really by the Prime Minister, who herself was a recommendation from the Supreme Space Council, as I recall. And then Parliament approves or rejects those nominations. And then we have report back sessions at the digital sittings of the Parliament and the physical sittings as well. And sometimes we have something called an executive congress, where all the chairs of the 12 departments, if you like, meet with the ministers from those 12 departments, and then the big four, if you like, the chair of Parliament, the head of nation, the Supreme Justice, and the head of administration also attend. And then we have some other administrators. So we meet and we work together to achieve solutions. So on this first point, actually, it's not really very hierarchical. And there's a lot of deference because a lot of the ministers were actually chairs of committees before they became ministers. So when you've got 150 plus the 12 ministers, it's small enough for people to know each other. I've set a precedent, a protocol in Parliament where we're on first name terms. So I say, for example, John, do you want to speak? John Fine. Or TJ, I mentioned her before, or Ferda, or Ricky. And so although it's a formal process, we know each other personally. And it's surprising to me how well you can know 170 people if you meet them almost regularly. If push comes to shove, with some changes in the Constitution, it is possible for Parliament to dismiss the government, or indeed the Prime Minister. At this stage, we have been nowhere near that. There's never been a suggestion that we need to evoke those rules, but it is enshrined. So if you get in a situation where, let's say, Darth Vader gets to be the head of the government, we'd like to think that Asgardia's processes would stop it before it gets to, let's say, the Empire Strikes Back. On the second point, explain what's the main specific thought about this? The second question.
No, I mean, just out of interest, are any British MPs Asgardia?
Oh, I see. You mean like in British Parliament?
Yeah.
Have
any joined?
Yeah, we had one who was a member of. It was actually the deputy speaker, former deputy speaker of the House of Commons. But then he got back to being a deputy speaker, and he had to give up his external interest. We've got a former MP, Pramjit Singh from Leicester. He was a member of Parliament. I'm obviously a former member of Parliament. We have no sitting MPs there at the moment, but there's no obstacle to being an MP anywhere in the world, indeed, or a politician anywhere in the world, and being with us. So if somebody from some other nation state, prime minister or president, wants to join us, we won't judge. We'll have Joe Biden and Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, anybody else, because we don't involve ourselves in the affairs of terrestrial politics. We see the person, not the politician on Earth. And when they come along, they'll be treated just like everybody else. If we did have 220 world leaders, I think that would make headlines.
Right, I think we've got Jerry Stone wants to actually come on screen and ask a question, so we're going to try and get him on screen. Is Simon able to get him? Can you activate your video, Jerry?
Here's a test for the British Interplanetary Society. Fascinating.
It has to be done from this PC. That's the problem.
Fascinating questions, by the way.
Yes. There's a fairly searching. I've got some more for you.
It feels like a job interview, actually.
Yes.
Not sure what the job is.
All right. I'll stand by. Hang on.
Just to say also that you don't have to make this the only time that we debate, because Asgardia's weekly question and answer session on Thursdays with me, which is usually at 1800 Greenwich Mean Time, is open for global viewing. So we broadcast that unedited, uncensored, so that you can follow what's going on.
Right, Jerry's. I've got him on my screen. Have you not got him there?
Yep, we're up here. Although I'll just
Are you able to
put him in the room? Yeah, there we go. Jerry.
Oh, great.
Hi, Jerry. Hi. Can you?
Hi, there we go. So as you can see, I am an Asgardia resident. I don't know if you remember, Lembit, we're all going to die at a school in Welwyn Garden City some years ago. I wanted to ask you if you're talking about
threatening anybody at the actual school.
Sorry, as you've been talking about the Asgardia Parliament, would you like to say when the next elections are due to take place?
Yes, you've just missed them, I'm afraid.
I know there was last year, and unfortunately I just missed getting an application in.
Don't panic. Two good bits from you. Good to see you again, by the way. And I'm always happy to come back and do another speech at that wonderful school. I really loved being down there. Beautiful place. And this, just to explain, We're All Going to Die speech was about the threat of near-Earth objects. But it ends optimistically because my friend Jay Tate, who runs Space Guard UK up in Wales, he is helping us guard against a bad brush with a big rock. In terms of your question, we did have the parliamentary elections last June. The next ones will be in about 4.5 years' time for the scheduled ones. But I believe we'll have midterm by-election, which will be in about maybe 1.5 to 2 years' time. So that's a chance for you to stand. I'd expect us to top up the parliament because you always get people leaving or sadly 1 or 2 cases passing away. And then we need to keep the numbers up at about 150. But the other thing you can do is join us as a resident. You can stand for city representative, country representative, continental representative. You can get in touch with me. You've got my details. And
yes.
I'm very happy to help you with that. Or go to asgardia.space and send me a note, and we'll get back to you. I think you should do this. You should be a pioneer in your school and inspire your pupils.
Who needs kids? You've got them already. Right. Now we'll have to go on to the next question then, and we've got TR asking, when's the first trip to space? Do we have a date in the calendar?
Well, the first unmanned trip took place a few years ago. You saw the video of that. There wasn't anybody on that spacecraft, but all the data from all the then Asgardians was on it. The first manned space trip with an Asgardian has already occurred, because we've had Asgardians on the International Space Station. In terms of commercial operation, or in terms of the direction of travel we want to take, which is permanent human space habitation, we set a target of 2043 for the first permanent human space habitation. That seemed like a long way off in 2018, but it's only 20 years away now. Is that possible? I think so. Human beings relentlessly underestimate speed of technological development. The main thing that needs to happen to achieve that is to get that economy I mentioned going before, to get the billions we need to achieve that. But remember, we're not talking about state-sponsored handouts here. We're talking about a partnership between people who want to live in space and people who want to make that possible. The fastest, this is my opinion, this is not official Asgardian policy, but the fastest we could do that would probably be within about 5 years. But the furthest out will be 20. So we haven't got an actual date. Though we're talking about 2 unmanned space launches in the next few years, Asgardia 2 and Asgardia 3. And that will be to further establish our territory in orbit.
Right, we've got one last question. Actually, it's been partly answered by Talil. David Hindley asks, who runs the banking system of Asgardia?
We've got a finance minister, and he's responsible, Mark Bogan. He's responsible for running the system. And then we have administrators to make that work as well. It's a blockchain system, so we have the kind of people we need to make sure the blockchain is secure. It's all done internally, but Dr. Asher Bailey is always looking for a way to establish our central bank as something which is recognized as part of our nation and part of the banking system that terrestrial nations will take seriously too. And remember, once again, one solar's worth €1. That's guaranteed. It's fixed. It's like the gold standard of the old days. So, okay, the euro goes up and down, but the solar goes up and down with it. It's not a floating currency. And so far, the solar financial processes have worked quite well. And some people have made a lot of money already. One gentleman cashed in his solars and built a whole new property on his land based on what he'd earned in Asgardia. So we've already got some people who've made money out of it. But I would say 2 things in conclusion. The first one is it might be possible to get rich quite soon in Asgardia, but there are probably easier ways to do it. But there are very few as interesting ways to do it, because you're pioneers, and space is the big economic opportunity facing the West. I've got one more question, I think, as well.
Oh, we've got one in here, right?
And I'll save you the second point just until we...
Okay, we'll ask that question. Alex has the interesting one.
What is the current caseload of the justice system? And how many of those cases make their way up to the Supreme Justice?
Only, that could be wrong. I would say 2 cases in the last 5 years have gone to the Supreme Justice formally. But in total, probably half a dozen times I've asked the Supreme Justice for advice. In terms of trials, if I consider what could be considered trials, things that have occurred and involved the Supreme States Council, once again, probably those 6 in that time. We'll get on well at this moment. But if we have 1.5 million residents, human beings can get angry and they can disagree with each other. And then it would be much busier than that, I think. But then we'd have to ask ourselves, how do we fund that? Do you have to pay to take things to court and so forth? But to this point, I would say half a dozen.
And what was the most serious case?
Pardon?
What was the most serious case?
It was confidential. Somebody was behaving, I can tell you the general subject. Somebody was doing something which was against the values of Asgardia. And I went to so time consuming. I went to huge lengths to try to get the evidence. We did get the evidence. We had to get legal guidance. It costs a lot of money, but that's because we wanted to do it right. And in the end, our finding was robust. The person challenged it, but I'm confident that we did the right thing. And it was about, it was a matter of behavior. It wasn't just an opinion that the person was not believing in Asgardia. It's something that the individual did. And we stood by that. And we said, if you want to take us to a terrestrial court, you go right ahead. And he didn't.
Also, you've twice appointed your head of nation. Were there any alternative candidates?
There have been other people who've talked about standing to challenge Dr. Asgardia, but none of them has transpired. It's not that people are stopped from standing. If you're a resident, you can actually stand if you fulfill the pretty straightforward criteria. But the truth is, I think that Asgardia is really still very much the legacy project for the Earth of Dr. Asgardia, who's doing it because he just believes the Earth has to go there. And I can't think of anyone who would be in a better position to take that role on for now. He won't do it forever. He doesn't pretend he'll do it forever. But I think he wants to carry on doing it for now. I chose to stand for a second term as Chair of Parliament for the same reason. I think I'm about halfway through the work that I'm planning to do in that job. I don't know if I'll stand again. Maybe I will. It doesn't matter. We'll decide that in 4 years' time. But at the moment, we seem to have a stability at the top. And by the way, I have to tell you, it wasn't like that at the beginning. We didn't get government right to begin with. That's not a secret because I've said so before. But we got it right the second time round. And that was a bit messy, but that's because people don't set up nations very often. And this is the first time anyone's ever set up a digital nation and made it work.
And also, the elections more generally, how competitive are they and what's the turnout?
I think we had something like 230 candidates for 150 places. So it was contested. And I didn't hear your second.
What's the turnout?
I don't know that, I'm afraid. I was the returning officer. I should know it, but I was the returning officer for the by-election, but this time I was a candidate, so I couldn't be the returning officer. But let me put it, this doesn't really answer your question directly, but it's the best I can do now. I'll find out for you afterwards. It'll just take me one phone call, but I don't want to do it while I'm presenting. There were enough people to decide 150 positions without anyone running out of votes in a meaningful way. So the decision was decisive. It was a proper, effective election. Dr. Asgardia wants the residency to go up so that I think there will have been thousands of voters, basically. I think we have something like 10,000 residents or 8,000, but he really wants hundreds of thousands of people. So he's not satisfied with where we've got to, and nor am I. But you're hopefully going to join, and then you'll have a vote next time. You could be candidates.
Here we go. You've got one volunteer here.
Can I? You want to ask?
Well, you've got two questions that arrived in because of what you've been saying, I think. What is the current population of Asgardia and how rapidly is it increasing? That's from David Hindley.
1.1 million, of whom a much smaller proportion are actually paying residents. But our mission is to convert those followers into residents. And my goal, if we can set up this embassy in Turkey, is to have a physical presence and see how that will affect the 34 million people who live in Istanbul. And in terms of growth, the residency went up very quickly, and then it's plateaued now, or maybe sort of declining a little bit because it goes like that. It depends how much activity we're promoting. But I expect a big spike again in April because of the work that we're doing in Dallas in Texas around the eclipse. I'm interested to see if we can convert that into substantial growth. Then the other thing, of course, now that we're here, we begin to reach out, we're confident enough to reach out, we'll have more allies, and that's going to grow it quite quickly too, I think.
Right, thank you. That's another one here. Who audits your security in your central bank? And thank you, Lembit, to hear you speak again. That's from Andrew Sturman.
Oh, right. Greetings, Andrew. Hope you're a resident. Do join. On the first part, the operational daily auditing is done internally. But of course, because technically we operate as a non-governmental organisation, that's the interface between us as a nation and the work that we're doing on Earth. It has to be audited according to the terrestrial rules. Now, we have been based in Vienna. That might be moving now, but that means that under Austrian law, we have to be audited independently. But we fulfill the laws of the land where we are based. But in terms of the internal auditing, that's done. The operational auditing is done by our internal systems. And so far, there have been attempts to hack into it and so forth, but those have been repelled. But if you're meaning about on Earth, then at the moment it would have been Vienna.
Right, well, thank you. I think we're going to draw to a close now because I think we've exhausted the questions and probably exhausted you as well.
So let me just say one last thing before I finish then. This is a book, which I shall give you in just a moment. I want to thank you because this is Asgardia's new outreach. And I invite the British Interplanetary Society to be set formally fellow travellers with us, which we can talk about, because I know that what caused the BIS to be formed in 1933 is what caused Dr. Asher Bailey to form Asgardia in 2016. And if we do this together, we've got the technology, we've got the society, and we've got the belief that the human race doesn't end on Earth. It just begins here. And as I said before, I hope my predecessors and my family will be proud. And I hope that your children will be proud when they say, my mummy, my daddy helped us get there. Thank you very much. And this is a book for you.
Thank you very much.
There you go. That's the book from Asgardia.
We'll be doing a quick swap here then.
Oh, right. Oh,
for you. And thank you very much. We ought to applaud our...
Thank you. Thank you for watching. Great.
I thought you would deserve a couple of months.
Thank you very much. Oh, thanks very much indeed.
Times that you could actually wear something other than Asgardia.
Yeah, I shall wear that now. I shall put it on immediately after.
Do you want a picture from here over there?
Okay, let's get the book in as well.
Oh yes, we get the book in. We are.
Hopefully.
Yeah, you've got to get forward so that you don't have a stripe across your head.
Yeah, good point, well made. Yeah.
Essentially here, just for my own. That's okay. Great. And one more. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Got one more going there.
That's all right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
And thanks for watching.
I hope that everyone online has learned a lot too, and they're all going to become your members.
I hope so. And join the British Interplanetary Society too.
Yeah, well, we'll get them on board. Great. Thank you very much, and thank you all very much. Now the bar will be open there, but it's a donations bar tonight, and we'll get off to have some supper, I think.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much.